Today we want to continue with our study of 1 Chronicles chapter 15 and verse 13 as it relates to the principle of due order. Remember in 1 Chronicles 15 and verse 13, David reacts to God striking Uzzah dead because Uzzah touched the Ark of the Covenant, and David acknowledged that it was his fault in the first place because he didn't seek God after the due order. Because again, if you remember, the Philistines had taken the Ark. The nation of Israel, it was sent back to them after God plagued them with the emerids or the tumors. And then these individuals placed it on a cart and brought it into Jerusalem. And it was always intended to be carried on the shoulders of the Levites of the family of Kohath. You can reference back to Numbers chapter 3 and Numbers chapter 7 for that information. So when we're talking about seeking God's authority, seeking the due order, we have covered various aspects of it. We've covered God's nature. We've covered the plan of salvation. So now we want to talk about worship, due order as it relates to worship. We understand that worship is regulated. In John 4 and verse 24, Jesus says, God is a spirit. Those that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. That establishes very firmly the fact that you can't just do anything you want to in worship. Worship is not about entertaining you or entertaining the quote-unquote audience or the congregation. Worship is about glorifying God by doing his will, which in turn strengthens, encourages, and edifies us. So God, the Son, would say that worship is regulated. Worship must be in spirit and in truth. Now again, spirit is your attitude, right? Paul would say in Romans chapter 1 and verse 9, he served God in his spirit. We know that this is a godly, submissive, faithful attitude. And it involves proper motives, obviously. And the truth aspect of worship is obviously God's inspired word. So, quickly, we understand that worship being regulated, that means that we only do certain activities in worship, in our worship services, in our assemblies. We come together and we sing. Colossians 3 and verse 16 says that we speak to one another in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, singing with grace into your hearts. There is a reciprocity to singing. So we understand it in a congregational setting. When we sing, we are listening to the words, we're singing together, we're supposed to be singing with understanding, with our hearts. And as we do, we're not only praising God, but we're instructing one another with the words. So singing is a congregational activity. Singing is the only music that is authorized in the New Testament. There is zero authority to play any instrument other than your heart. And I'd love for somebody to show me otherwise. There is a scriptural precedent established very early in the New Testament that would firmly establish multiple acts of worship in the assembly. And it's kind of often overlooked. In Acts 2 and verse 42, it says, and they continued steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine, in the breaking of bread, in prayers. You have several acts of worship going on there. They mention fellowship, which implies giving. So you have the Lord's Supper being present on the first day of the week, beginning in that assembly, and would continue each and every week. They would pray together. They would continue in this doctrine, this instruction, and they would, of course, offer. You can see the offering in 1 Corinthians 16, verses 1 and 2. Paul would tell those in Corinth, as well as, obviously, 1 Corinthians 1, the very first few verses. He says he's not just talking to those in Corinth, but all who in every place call upon the name of the Lord. He is instructing them to lay by and store. That is, to put monies to collectively together in a congregation so that that congregation can do the works that it needs to do, such as support faithful preachers and faithful works that would spread the gospel, that would be that they could help others and they could continue to encourage and edify one another. Teaching is obviously a part of that. We said the apostles' doctrine in Acts 2:42. In Colossians 4 and verse 16, Paul would write this epistle, and he would tell them to read the letter from Laodicea and to take this letter and send it to Laodicea. So we understand that there was reading of Scripture in these assemblies. There was instruction going on in these assemblies. So we understand that if we worship God, we are to glorify him and do things his way. He said that he wants us, as we come together, we're going to have prayer. Prayer is to be led by men, 1 Timothy 2 and verse 8. Men are the ones who lead public acts of worship, period. That's just all there is to it. That's the only Bible authority. We are to sing together. We are to pray together. We are to have teaching or instruction. We are to observe the Lord's Supper on the first day of every week, and we're to give of our means on the first day of every week. We do these activities in the assemblies, in these worship assemblies, and we know that we're pleasing to God because that's exactly what the Bible teaches. So we know that when we worship God, as long as we do so in accordance to the due order, that we are pleasing to Him. And of course, the due order refers right back to His authority. So it's biblical precedent. It is exactly what the Bible teaches, and we know that we're pleasing to God. If you disagree, that's okay. You can email us at freeportcoc@gmail.com. You can comment on our Facebook or our YouTube videos and let us know what you think. If you have questions that you'd like to have answered, or if you would like to discuss something, let us know. We would be happy to address that. Thank you very much. Have a great day.